Alright, so I know I'm jumping the gun a bit with this one, because I hadn't originally intended on coming anywhere near it until we had finished with our Dracula review series. But I've recently just read through it, and I want to make sure that I get my thoughts on it out there while they're still floating around relatively fresh in my mind. Now, unfortunately, this book doesn't offer much in the way of a biography or any sort of fun facts that I typically like to put at the front of these sorts of videos. But what it does have is a couple different prefaces from the different publications of the book. And I specifically want to focus on the one from the 1831 version, as it's written in Mary Shelley's own words and provides a little taste of everything from early childhood to the famous writing contest from her own perspective, which I thought was kind of neat. So she starts off by talking about how um, her parents being so closely affiliated with writing and literature, um, etc., and being successful with it in their own right, made her feel quite a lot of pressure and almost an expectation to follow in their footsteps, which seems to be largely applied by her husband Percy after they had gotten married. But despite having the ability to write, I wouldn't say that she particularly enjoyed it. She much more fancied using her imagination, drifting off in thought, daydreaming, visualizing things. Fast forward a little bit, and she marries Percy at around the age of 17, and she mentions that they enjoyed traveling frequently. And the summer of 1816 was a very wet and rainy one spent in Switzerland, where they got to become acquaintances with their neighbor, Lord Byron. And over time, they got to know each other really well, got to be good friends, spent a lot of time together, swapping stories and whatnot. And that is ultimately how we get to the contest. And I have to put a pin right there and mention something that stuck out about this, because she goes out of her way to say that John Polidori's story was pretty horrendous. Now, she doesn't go on to elaborate on whether or not she's talking about the vampire or if he had submitted something before that, but I just thought it was pretty hilarious that she would go out of her way to call him out and say that she wasn't a fan. But she herself is pretty open about her own struggles with this, how she wasn't able to produce anything that she liked for this contest. Until one night when Lord Byron and Percy were having a conversation about Dr. Darwin, who I assume would be Charles Darwin, and his experiments on where he would reanimate tissue or organic material in a glass case. Now, as far as I'm able to tell, this is purely a myth based on a mix-up of facts involving Charles Darwin and his grandfather and kind of the things that they did in their respective careers. But nevertheless, she goes to bed that night with all of these details fresh in her mind, and she visualizes the whole thing. She has vivid nightmares of this mad scientist who's, stitching together a being made of cadaver parts, and reanimating him and creating new life. And that's uh, pretty much what gives us Frankenstein, or as it's otherwise known, the modern Prometheus. Now, as far as the book itself, very similarly to Dracula, I'm not going to be talking about a whole lot at length here, as I fully anticipate doing so countless times over as we progress through the movies. But what I will say is that the Boris Karloff movie with the a bumbling monster who is pursued by an angry mob and ends up throwing his creator off of a burning windmill or whatever, the one that we all know and love and respect, is pretty substantially wrong. I would say that it kind of skims over some of the basic concepts of the book in an obviously very monster forward type of way. But the reality is it goes much deeper than that. This is a very philosophical and psychological story that examines not only Victor Frankenstein's character in depth, but also the monsters, which is honestly my favorite part about it. On one side, Victor Frankenstein is a very Roman or Greek style glory hound who becomes very fixated and obsessed with being responsible for the next great leap in science. And he goes as far as to talk about how, wonderful and crazy it would be to create this lineage of beings that would look back to him as their God, their creator, their father, and how everybody in the science community and the world as a whole would kind of always associate him with being the reason for it all and being kind of at the top of the family tree, so to speak. But once he succeeds, his tune drastically and instantly changes to, oh my god, what the hell have I done, sort of thing. And he's basically like, I can't allow this thing to exist in our world, let alone more of them. And he dedicates his life to pursuing and destroying it. And the monsters story is pretty much from the moment that he escapes Victor's apartment. He's, developing his senses to take in the world around him. And the bulk of that story is spent observing a family in their cabin in secret. And it's through, studying their interactions and whatnot that he learns language, he learns reading and writing, he learns at least a brief history of humanity, that humans are or can be capable of a great many wonderful things, but also not so much. He learns a little bit about God and his relationship to Adam, and through that has the realization that his creator, his father, his God, is ashamed of him and quite frankly has a pretty deep-seated hatred for him, and he's intelligent enough to kind of formulate this revenge plot where he wants to make Victor's life as lonely and miserable as his is. And, you know, I wouldn't say that this is a story that has a clear-cut protagonist-antagonist relationship, right? I think you can clearly understand and sympathize with a lot of their motivations. You know, just as easily as you could kind of see where their choices and some of their decisions and whatnot starts to lead them astray. I think it's both sides of the same coin. But all in all, I guess in closing, I would say that I did enjoy this read. Although if given the choice between it and Dracula, I'm probably choosing Dracula. But in its defense, these are two radically different horror stories. I wouldn't say that Frankenstein is a particularly fun story to read, nor do I think that it's intending to. I think its main intention is to show that a lot of those positive emotions, fun, excitement, entertainment, love, you know, the whole spectrum, are just fleeting things that very rapidly devolve into misery on both accounts of the story here in terms of perspectives. But yeah, I would say, you know, this is another great piece of horror history to have on my shelf. If you haven't read it, you definitely should. But I think that is going to wrap this video up, guys. So as always, thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you in the next one.